And we are live. G'day everyone, Mike Jeffrey here, and you are listening to My Creative Journey, episode number 30. To all you new listeners out there, hello, and thank you so much for taking the time to stop by here today. As I said, my name is Mike, and I'm a wedding photographer based here in Sydney, Australia. Each week on the show, I bring you guys along on the highs and lows of my own creative journey, and share all the knowledge that I've gained along the road to building my own freelance business. And in today's episode, we are talking about taxes. And not such an interesting topic, but I think it can provide a lot of value for anyone who has their own small business out there, any of you creatives out there wanting to start your own business or looking to turn a hobby into a business. And I think this is so important to talk about. First off, your own personal finances, but then finances in the business as well, and sorting out how you can deal with some of those taxes towards the end of financial year. It's been something that I've been working on for the past few weeks, and I thought that I would bring it into this episode. I want to touch on what I've been up to for the past week, but before I do that, let's talk about this episode at the moment, and let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is that I'm actually recording this episode on video. Now, you guys will know that if you are actually watching this video on YouTube. I'm uploading this episode and hopefully all the future episodes of this podcast on YouTube as well. So that will be very interesting to see how that goes. I've been wanting to sort of experiment, I guess, with different mediums and different ways of uploading this podcast and distributing it to a wider range of people. And I think that is a great way to be able to get it out there to as many people as possible. So if you are watching on YouTube, hello, and thank you so much for tuning in today. If you're still listening just to the audio only version, that is great as well. And I will still try to tailor this podcast towards that so that you won't miss out on anything by not watching the video. But today is episode number 30, and hard to believe that we're at episode 30, especially being 8 months into this podcast now. Being at episode 30 feels like a big deal. Every sort of 10 episodes, I kind of say that I'm so proud of where we've actually come through this podcast. I hit 300 downloads on the podcast this week, which was amazing, and amazing to see that people are still sticking around. I think I hit 200 podcasts in episode 19, 300 at episode 29. So consistently getting about 10 listeners per episode, which I think is a big deal. A lot of people probably wouldn't think that is that many people, but I wouldn't be able to sit in a room with just 10 people and have this conversation with them. So the fact that this podcast is reaching that many people per episode is just amazing, and amazing to see that people are still coming back and tuning in for episodes, because if they weren't actually gaining value from them, I don't think they would be coming back. And it is something that people are starting to include in their routine, and people are messaging me on Monday and Tuesday saying that they've listened to the episode on the first day that it comes out, which I'm really excited that people are putting that time in and sort of making time for this podcast in their busy schedules. Now, what else has been going on for me this past week? Well, not a great deal. As I spoke about in the last couple of episodes, we've been in lockdown here in Sydney in the moment, and really not a great deal happening. As I said, my business has really come to a bit of a standstill because I can't actually go out and take photos. I spoke about last week that I'm trying to expand my online store, so start up my print store again. And this is something that I've spoken about a lot on this podcast, and about how I launched it last year, and sort of talking about some of the successes, some of the failures in that, and sort of taking that to the next step, I think. So that is going to be something that is going to be coming towards the end of this month, I think in the next couple of weeks. So do stick around for that, and do let me know if that is something that you're interested in, because I would love to let you guys know when that does come out. So keep your ear out and eye out for that one, because I think it's going to be very exciting to see the images where they've come from. I've been looking back over the print store from last year, because I didn't have it active, but I still have access to all the images that were up there. And interesting to see the change in style over the past year, and hopefully it reflects a little bit more closely to what I think is artwork that people would be more inclined to hang in their home, in their office, in their lounge room, whatever that may be. I think that the particular style of photography last year, I think that sort of dictated a little bit into whether people were buying the artwork or not, because they couldn't actually see it in their own home. But hopefully this year, with the different change in style of my photography and the improvement and the growth that I've seen over the past year, hopefully allows for that, and hopefully people can see the need or the benefit of actually having that within their home. And I really look forward to where we're going to go with that, because I think I've made a few changes and used a few of the things from last year that really didn't go so well, and sort of changed those and try to make them into a bit more of a positive feature. So that'll be interesting, and I will speak about that when that launches, because I think that is something that you guys are going to be really interested in, and seeing a bit of the behind the scenes on that. I think I'm going to make an episode about how I really launched that, and some of the different strategies that I put in place to hopefully spread that out a bit wider and hopefully try to cast as wide a net as possible to grab people who are interested in that sort of work, but also some of the techniques that I'm using behind the scenes to sort of price and market and all the other things that go into actually hosting that sort of print store. So if that is something you guys are interested in, stay tuned for that episode, hopefully coming in a couple of weeks. But for now, we're going to continue rolling on with this episode. And as I said, this is episode 30, which also always blows my mind. And I'm trying to catch up with a lot of my actual social marketing. I spoke about recording this episode as a video podcast, and that has been one of the strategies that I'm trying to put in place to try and really reach a wider audience with this podcast. It's been something that I've been trying to do for the longest time, but didn't really think that I had the time to be able to develop a video podcast. It was never something that I saw in the works for this podcast, but something that I always wanted to try my hand at and see where we could go, because I knew it was a obvious next step. I think as a promotional platform, uploading podcasts to YouTube allows for more reach, a lot more searchability for different topics, different styles of podcasts on there, and then hopefully convert people into just listening to the audio version if that is something that they're interested in. So having that searchability is something that you do get on YouTube that you just really don't have the actual capability for on something like Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anything like that. You can't really search for a specific sort of topic. So that is something that I've been looking for, and also sort of hoping to grab some of the snippets from the video and post them on social media. I've been really slack trying to update the social media and the Instagram account for this podcast. I've been trying to do it over the past couple of weeks. You may have seen I've been trying to post an episode every day and sort of advertise that as something on Instagram, because I've really fallen off on that in the past couple of months. It's been something that I've been very far behind at, and trying to pick that up, because I know that it's one of the biggest strategies that I have in being able to get the podcast out to as many people. And by posting different snippets allows people who haven't listened to a full episode to hear a little bit and see whether they actually like it, to sort of grab that taste of whether it's something that they may be interested in, but just haven't ever got around to actually listening to it. And that may really hook them in. So having a sort of video component so they can really put a face to the name of who is behind this podcast allows it to reach a wider audience, even people who aren't following me particularly on Instagram, or people who don't know who I am. Allowing that net to cast a bit wider, I think, is important and something that I really wanted to do. So that is why we are introducing the sort of video elements into this podcast. It still shocks me to this day that people don't know that I have a podcast. And I think this is a sort of twofold effect, where I don't want to be outwardly sort of advertising that I have a podcast. It's not something that I'm trying to brag about. It's not something that I'm trying to put out there in the world that everyone should be listening to the podcast, because no, I don't think everyone should be listening to it. This is for a very niche audience of people who are interested in the type of thing that I'm interested into, and maybe in a creative field, in an industry where they're trying to start something for themselves and trying to look at sort of my process. But it's amazing that I feel like I'm always promoting the podcast, always publishing about it on Instagram and on my social medias, and when I'm having conversations with people in person, talking about it, people ask me about it all the time. But then occasionally I still get people saying, I didn't know you had a podcast. And that really speaks to the fact that I'm not promoting it enough. The fact that on Instagram you can promote something all you want, but if people haven't seen those particular Instagram stories, for example, you really post about on Instagram, if they don't see that particular post, then you're not targeting them at all. A big thing that I have is that if I post through the week on my Instagram stories, I only get, say, 100 people actually look at my stories each day. So I can sort of tell how many people have actually viewed the stories, and I get about 100 people. If I post on the weekend, I get about 180 to probably about 200 people. So that's twice as many people looking at my story. So for instance, if I'm just posting about my podcast episodes released on a Monday, if I just post about it on a Monday afternoon, then that's potentially I'm missing out on 100 people who could see it if I posted about it on a weekend. If I talked about it on a completely different service, if I posted about it on Facebook, if I posted about it on TikTok, things like this, a wider audience of people who may be there but not on Instagram at the particular time when I'm posting. So it really spoke to me about that, and that I need to keep trying to put it out there, that there are more people who don't actually know that I have this podcast and who may be interested. So these are some of the things that I'm trying to really push for and trying to get it out there as much as I can, because I really enjoy making these episodes and enjoy being able to bring this content to you guys and being able to tell my story, and hopefully I know that you guys are gaining a lot from it. So I'm hoping that other people would be able to gain just as much from it as you guys are at the moment. So being able to put it out there as much as I can is really one of those strategies that I have in being able to provide value to as many people as possible. On the topic of social media, one of the other things that I really noticed through the week was me being on Instagram and sort of scrolling through, and I was on the Explore page, and I noticed a few people on there who I knew, a few people who I, for instance, watch on YouTube, or I listen to their podcast, or I sort of read their blog up to date with things that they do in their life, but I'm not actually following them on Instagram. And it made me really think about why I'm not following them on Instagram. And I sat back and I sort of thought that I'm not following them because I think that is what they want me to do. They're sort of targeting me with ads all the time. They're the type of people who are always on my Explore page because Instagram thinks that I'm interested in their work, which I am, because clearly I'm interested in an aspect of their work. If I'm watching them on YouTube or listening to their podcast or things like that, then why haven't I added them on Instagram? And I really had to sit back and think about that why is it something that I haven't done yet? Why is it something that I haven't added them on Instagram? And yeah, it came back to the fact that I didn't want to do it because I thought that was what they wanted me to do. And so it's really led me to think that if I'm trying to push something hard or too hard at people, maybe it turns them the wrong way. And so trying not to be too persuasive. And I never want to use this podcast as a sort of platform to advertise anything to you guys. I don't think it inherently is. I think me being a photographer, I'm not really speaking to anyone who would be a potential client of mine here. I don't think I'm speaking to anyone who would potentially book me as a wedding photographer. So speaking to other creative people, I don't ever want to be able to push something of mine onto them. And I think a lot of people fall into that trap and sort of push people the wrong way. I know it really can be a great way to advertise a lot of different things. By having a podcast, a lot of people use it as an advertising service to sort of spruik their own sort of businesses and their own services. But I think for me, that sort of drives me the other way. And I don't really want that to be the case for this podcast because, yeah, it's never been something that I've really wanted to do. And I know, and I've really seen the impact that that's had on me. And so maybe that's the wrong way that I think about that. Maybe that is something I've had to think about. And I did actually go back and add these people because I think that they do provide a lot of value in my life. And why would I sit there and think that, oh, I'm not going to add them because they're asking me to add them? Well, they've also provided a lot of value to me over the years through their YouTube channel or through their podcasts and through actually reading things of theirs online. They've provided a lot of value to me. So I should support them back and actually interact with them on social media and try to get their net as wide as possible. I think by helping them, it helps me as well. And we shouldn't be in direct competition. I don't think I am in direct competition with these people, but I feel like I don't want to be sort of sold to by anyone else. So I don't sort of buy into their social media feeds to be able to be sold to. So I sort of steer clear. But at the end of the day, I'd rather be sold to by them than by someone I don't know or someone I don't really care about. I'm interested in what those guys are up to. I'm interested in what they're trying to sell. I'm interested in what they're trying to do in their own life, so that directly helps me and impacts me. So that's been something that I've been thinking about. Just a little bit of an off-topic thing there that I've been thinking about over the past week, and it comes back to sort of last week's episode, being a bit more reflective and using the downtime that we do have at the moment in lockdown to be able to be a bit more reflective on a lot of the things that I do and a lot of the things that I've tried to do over the past couple of years, and sort of thinking about why it is I do everything. So I just wanted to provide that to you guys this week. One of the other things that I really want to touch on, and sort of leads into today's episode, is something that I was doing yesterday, I think. I had a print order through my website probably 3 weeks ago. I had a print order from some photos that I shot back in April. So one of the family members of the people I was taking photos for ordered some prints off me online, which you are able to do if you decide to do a photography session with me. You can then order prints almost up to a year afterwards, after the session, and they did. So I've been going back and forth with the print store. I ordered the prints. I went and picked them up yesterday. Then went to the post office to drop them off to get them sent out. And I was thinking about that, and it really led me to think about my sort of pricing. And this is something that I've spoken about before, in that something that was a little bit outdated in my pricing was the fact that they could directly order those online from their actual gallery of images that I sent them when they did the photo shoot. And they ordered them online. And after actually ordering the prints and actually paying for the prints, paying to get them shipped out, I only made $15 off the sale, right? So which isn't a great amount of money. And it definitely isn't enough amount of money for the time that I spent organizing them. After they ordered the prints, I had to go on and get the prints and get the actual files and send them to the print store. Then I had to hang on 2 weeks for them to be printed, had to drive to the print store to pick them up, had to package them up, had to drive to the post office, and then actually get them sent out. So when you add up all that time, it's really not worth $15. And that had me questioning, why am I only pricing my artwork at how much it is? I don't ever want to be someone that makes a lot of sales on the back end of actually going out and taking photos for clients. But at the end of the day, it's got to be sustainable for me. And at that price, it's not sustainable. So it really made me think about, what am I doing that's wrong? What am I trying to do for other people? And why am I prescribing them my photos at a certain price? Why am I not increasing the price of the photos? Because to those guys, those images are sort of priceless to them, because it's a moment in time that they're never going to have again. And they have these images and they would really like to get them printed through me. So why am I to then prescribe a price on the photos by me saying that I think I should be sort of reasonably priced, because I don't want to make people spend a lot of money on the prints of their photos. Whereas if they want to spend that much money, if that's what it's worth to them, I shouldn't be prescribing that. So maybe I should be increasing my prices at least to be able to make a little bit of money off that, because at the end of the day, I have to work hard to be able to get that sale. I work almost harder there than I do actually going out and actually taking the photos, because I enjoy that work. Working in the back end to actually get the photos ready to go to send to the print store, actually go and pick them up from the print store, head to the post office. That's not work I enjoy. That's not work that I gain any pleasure out of. That's not work that's increasing my sort of portfolio at all. So sort of thinking about those sorts of things, and those things that I can do to increase the amount of money that I can make off those items and actually make it a bit more sustainable for myself, because I looked at it yesterday and thought, this is not something that I can be able to maintain. It's not something that's actually making me any money whatsoever. So why would I continue to actually offer that as a service if I'm not going to make money off it? So these are some of the things, and that sort of led me into sort of going back and looking at those prices I spoke about last week, looking at my prices for my actual wedding photography and the actual photography itself, but then also looking at the price on the back end of how much it is to get an actual image printed from that, how much it is to have an album done up and all things like that on the back end of actually having the photos taken. And I don't ever want to be someone, as I said, to make a lot of money on the back end. I don't want to say, come have your photos taken with me, it's only X amount of money, but then to get your images printed out, it's going to be twice as much, because I'm trying to make all my money on the back end. Once I already have that client through the door, I've got all the images, so now it's in my court. I don't ever want to be that sort of business, but also on the other end of the token, I don't want to be a business that's in 12 months isn't in business anymore, because I'm not able to make any money from those sorts of sales. So we're really looking at that sort of stuff, and this is a continual learning curve, and I sort of put this out there to you guys because I'm sure there are elements in your business or in your everyday life where you think about, why are you trying to charge an amount of money? Why are you spending an amount of money on something that doesn't really provide you any value? So looking at what you can do to sort of evaluate that, and sort of going back over that as often as possible, I think is the best way to be able to learn, but also grow from these experiences. And so with all that out of the way, let's jump into today's topic, which is all about taxes. And this is an episode that I've been wanting to make for quite some time now. I've been looking into my own taxes in business for quite a while now, and I thought that it would be an interesting episode to make, because I think there are a lot of people out there who struggle with this, and a lot of people who are interested in sort of getting into business and not knowing what to do with all of their finances and things like that. I made an episode a while ago talking all about my finances and about your money and all different types of things, episode number 15, I think. And I think to this day, it's the most downloaded episode. After episode number 1, it's the next episode that's been the highest downloaded. So you guys were really interested in that episode. I think there was a lot of reception around that episode and the things that I was open with and able to talk about on that episode. So I'm hoping to sort of provide as much value as I can in this episode, because I think this is something that you guys can gain a lot from. And I'm hoping that this episode can be something that's all encapsulating. I want to talk about all different parts of my actual finances in business and really give you guys sort of a deconstruction of what I do and what I do in business, and the things that, how I earn my money in business for starters, but also then the things that I'm able to claim on my tax return. Now, I do apologize in advance if you're overseas. This probably won't make a lot of sense if you're not in Australia. You probably won't understand a lot of things, but I think a lot of the things are sort of relevant to wherever you are in the world, and sort of being able to know where you are in your own personal finances and in your own business finances, especially, I think is very important. So a lot of the different themes we talk about today are definitely going to be relevant to your own business, but just make sure that you are up to date with your own your laws in your own countries and things like that. And also, this is not financial advice. Please have a look at your own taxes. Make sure you know the rules. Make sure you get your own tax agent, all things like that, before you start implementing any of those things. But these are just some avenues to look down. And I think being in business, we need to be able to explore all different types of things. And actually knowing where to start can be the hardest thing to do. And I certainly found that in the beginning, not knowing where to start on my taxes, not knowing what actual things I had to hold on to, not knowing what sort of categories I could sort of class things as, and where I can make actual money and where I can make deductions and things like that. So please know that this is just advice from my scenario, but it may not be the same in yours. So please check that out in your own time. Now, today's episode, I really want to touch on two separate parts of this episode. I really want to talk about first how I earn my money, whether that be through products and services, and then after that, where I can claim my deductions. So all different expenses that happen in my business that reduce on my net income and result in overall profit or loss. So we're going to touch on those 2 points. And first of all, we're going to start with earnings. So where do I make my money? I think this is an important sort of point to touch on because a lot of people aren't open with this. A lot of people don't talk about where they make their money at all. And I think that's a real shame in this industry, especially in any sort of creative industry. Anyone who's a sort of freelancer, sort of solopreneur, people don't talk about where they make their money from, and it makes them out to look like online that they're overly successful when they may not actually be, or overly successful in an area where they're actually not. They're not actually making money where you think they're making money, and you think that it's really attainable for you because you think, oh, they're in a profession that I'm interested in. If they're making that money, I can too. Whereas it turns out they're only making about 10% of their money in that profession. The other 80% comes from their sort of part-time job that they have on the side. So being aware of where people are making their money, I think, is important, and people really should be more open with this because it allows people to get into this industry a lot more easily because there isn't that sort of stigma around talking about these sorts of things. And I think that is one of the big barriers to entry into this profession, is really not knowing where to start. There's no sort of rule book in this, but people aren't always as open and honest as they should be. And I think people should be providing advice where they can, because no one starts right at the top. People had to start from somewhere, and so they should be helping others who are a little bit below them. So let's start with where I make my money. And as you guys know, I am a photographer. If you didn't know that by now, well, I suppose now you do. So I'm a photographer. I've been working in that for the past couple of years, and we're going to talk about sort of where I made my money in the last sort of financial year. So this is from the end of June last year and to the end of June this year. So we're going to talk about where I sort of made all my money. So starting off, we have my family and couples photography, which is something that I did sort of towards the back end of last year. Haven't really done any of that at all this year so far, but it really was something that I started my photography journey in last year. And so that made up about 12% of the income that I made in my business. So I think I made about $800 from that at the end of last year by actually going out and doing a few shoots with a few different people. I made sort of that amount of money from that. And then on the back end of that, we sort of had the sort of type of sales I was talking about before, where people could then order prints on the back end of actually going out and having those photos taken. So I then made another $700 on the back end from people ordering prints afterwards, after the fact. So that sort of made up about, I think, 25% of my actual business income that I made in my business. And that was mostly all last year. I didn't really do much of that this year at all. So that was sort of in the first sort of 6 months of that financial year, towards the end of last year, that I made all that money. Now, in terms of my wedding photography, I only started in April this year, as you guys know, and I did my first couple of weddings for free. So I didn't actually make any money in this financial year. I actually have made money since the end of financial year. I had a few people actually book me in, so they've really paid their retainer and had a bit of money for that moving into next year. But in the end of the half of last year, didn't make any money from my wedding photography at all. So I don't have anything to report from that. The other big one where I made most of my money in my service business came from corporate photography. So this was work that I did with sort of businesses around town. Other people asked me to do events and things like that out of the scope of sort of family work and things like that. So that made me, I think, over half of my profit. I think 55% of my income in my own personal business. So my photography business, that made up 55% of my income, which was around $4,000, I think, overall, which was really nice to have those sort of clients. It's not something that I really want to work in, and I've spoke about this before. The opportunities that did come up were ones that I thought were really too good to turn down, and especially being early in my business, I'm not in a stage to sort of turn that work down. And I really enjoyed actually most of the work that I did there and really helped improve my skills. And I'm glad that I had that work because it actually provided me a lot of income when I did actually need it. So that was really nice, but not to put out that I make most of my money in wedding photography, because as you guys have seen, I haven't made any money in wedding photography in the last financial year, and most of it came in an area that I don't even advertise my services. These were just opportunities that really came up to me that I didn't really think about and didn't really see myself heading down. This is not a direction that I actually see myself heading. I'd love to head into wedding photography, and that's why I'm sort of diversifying myself now and advertising myself in that area. And I am starting to get more clients towards next year, and hopefully by this time next year we'll have more to report on in that area. The other way that I make my money, as I spoke about just before, was actually off my actual prints. So this is something that I do a little bit on the side, I guess, but I also do it as part of my business, and I did quite a bit of it towards the end of last year, and it's something I spoke about earlier in the episode about trying to relaunch my actual print store. So these are my sort of landscape photography and those sorts of things that sort of come in with that, and that was something that I was sort of really focusing on towards the end of last year. As you know, I sold a lot of calendars towards the end of last year, so that was included in that sort of landscape photography, actual prints and that sort of stuff. And I sold a few other prints when I launched my print store last year and had a few people ask me for prints and things like that. So that gets included in these numbers. So from actual prints themselves, I think I made $300 last year, the end of last year. So that equated to about 5% of my actual earnings. So not really a great deal coming from those prints. And that's something that I'm looking to improve on when I do launch my print store again this time, is that there were some things and there were some big downsides to what I was launching last year, and it really wasn't in the area that I wanted it to be. It really wasn't targeted enough, and that's all something that I'm going to be addressing this year, and I'm very excited to have that to actually move on from. If I would have said to myself last year, I would have made $300 on my landscape photography, I probably wouldn't have believed that, because I didn't think anyone would be remotely interested in actually purchasing any of my artwork. But now I think having that sort of mindset shift where I think that my work is up to a good enough standard, I think is really going to help propel that business forward and hopefully make me a bit more money in the back end, but hopefully provide people a lot more of my images that they actually like and really would want to buy. The other thing was then, as I said, my calendars towards the end of last year. I sold calendars for 2021. So that sort of ran from October to December last year. I had those on sale, and on that I made around $1,200. So that equated for then another 15% of my overall business income. So we're looking there at sort of 20% of my business income came from my landscape photography, which is an area that I didn't think would actually make me any money at all at the start of last year. So that was really good to expand that, and we're hoping to continue on that in the next financial year, because looking at these numbers really makes it blindingly obvious where I'm actually making quite a bit of money and the areas that I should be investing more of my time into. I've spoken about this in the last couple of weeks, talking about sort of social media and things like that, the areas where I get most of my referrals from. That's where I should be investing most of my time. If I look here where I'm earning the most amount of money, maybe that's where I should be trying to put more time into, especially if it is something that I enjoy as much as landscape photography. And that's why I'm really excited to launch this next print store, because I think it is going to be something that people are interested in, and people are going to actually gain a lot from. The images on there are going to be more aligned with what people are interested in actually having in their own home. So that's really exciting. So overall, in those sort of sales area, I think I made $6,800 for the whole course of the 2020 to 2021 financial year, which is a great amount of money. It's a lot more than I made on my business the year before. I don't think I even made any money in my business the year before, only having started it early last year, and I didn't make any sort of sales before June. So this is all the money that I've made in the business so far, and I'm really looking forward to increasing that in the next financial year, and hopefully we can grow there. I know that it's a slow growth process, and I know that I'm prepared. I've already made quite a bit of money already in this financial year from people actually booking in services for next year and things like that. So I know that it is going to grow and it is going to continue to compound. But looking at these numbers now, I'm very optimistic of where we can go from that, because this time last year I would have never said that I would have made $6,800 in my business. There is no way that I would have said that. And whilst it's not enough to be sustainable yet, I know it can be, and I know that there are things that I can improve on, and I know that there are things that I could do a lot better than I did this year. And again, I'm a year older, a year wiser, a year more experienced in business, so that the service I can provide, the amount of money I can charge is more, and we can move into that a lot better next year. Of course, you guys are also asking where the rest of my money came from, because I can't support myself on $6,800 a year. If you listen to episode 15, you'd know that my rent is more than that. So the rest of my income came from JobSeeker, which is a government payment here in Australia, and that's really been increased over the past year for people being out of work, out of being able to work during these lockdowns and during things happening during all the coronavirus things and things like that. So that has been something that has been providing me a bit more money on the side. I'm very thankful for that over the past year and a half, because that has been something that I've really relied on. Whilst it hasn't been a lot of money, it's been able to increase my amount that I'm earning in the business up to something which is sustainable moving forward, as well as a few savings that I had from before starting the business. I knew I could sort of go an amount of time without actually needing any more money. So with all of my income out of the way, let's look at some of my expenses and see which ones of my expenses I can then class as deductions to take off my taxable income. So if you guys aren't aware, I'm a sole trader. So that means that any income I earn in the business is added to any income that I earn outside the business, and overall that is my income for the whole year. So I'm able to be assessed on that income as an individual rather than as a business, because I'm not operating as a company here, I'm operating as a sole trader. So that means that any income that I earn in the business is then added to any other income that I earn anywhere else and is just taxed at my marginal tax rate. So being able to make deductions on the business expenses is very important to be able to bring my income down, so that brings how much tax I have to pay down. So first off, let's go through some of my expenses for the year and then talk about which of those we can then claim deductions on based on the fact that I'm working in a business. It's very important, first off, for anyone who's interested in starting their own business to be able to classify themselves as a business. You don't have to classify yourself as a business. If you're a photographer out there just earning a little bit of money on the side by actually selling your prints, you don't need to declare that income if it is just a hobby. If you're just doing that as a hobby on the side and not making a lot of money, as I probably am, with some of those numbers that you heard before, that could be classed as a hobby depending on which way you take it. I'm looking to scale this into a business, so I really want to get started early and sort of know the processes. But if you guys are out there just trying to sell a few prints on the side of images that you have taken while you're away on holidays, that doesn't need to be something that you declare as a taxable income, because the tax office will see that as just a hobby, and you earning any money from that is just the exact same as any other hobby that you may earn money from. If you were to advertise something for sale, say on Gumtree, you wouldn't have to declare that income because that to you is just a hobby and you're not operating as a business there. If you were operating a business where you did sell things all the time, if you actually bought things off other people and then did them up and then sold them, that would be classified as a business. So important to look into that if you are someone who is wanting to start in any sort of business. If you're looking to develop a hobby and turn it into a business, you need to look at the stages where the things may need to be classified and where the transition happens from you being only having it as a hobby to turning it into a business. So you can't make any deductions on things you have done if you're not declaring the income. If you're not actually operating as a business, you can't make deductions. So for me, I can make deductions for expenses that I have in the business that relate to things that I do in the business. For you, if you're just running it as a hobby, then you can't make any deductions based on any income you've earned, because you're not declaring income as actual income in your income tax return. So you can't make deductions on income you haven't claimed. So have a look into that and make sure that you are well aware on those rules before you start deciding to make deductions or thinking about actually transitioning into a business, because in your stage, it may not make any sense for you to classify yourself as a business if you're just earning a little bit of money on the side. So in terms of expenses, last year I spent $1,800 on actually manufacturing my prints to get them sent out, whether that be all of my calendars, whether that be actual prints, getting them printed at print stores and things like that, and then actually sending them out. It actually cost me $1,800. So I spent more than I made there. I spent a lot more than I made, and that is one of the big downsides of that, and being in my first year of business and not really knowing what to do with sort of actually having stock on site and knowing whether things would actually sell or not, and knowing how much to price things and that and the other. So I didn't actually make my money back on that. But overall, I'm not really concerned about that, to be honest, because that to me was just an excess on the side, and that has actually taught me a lot that I can then use when I do launch my print store again. And as I said, there are a lot of things that I'm putting in place, and I'll make an episode about that going forward. Other things, expenses that I have in business are things like advertising. I spend a little bit of money on advertising here and there, depending on what time of year it is, depending on who I'm trying to attract as a client and things like that. Also spend money on actually having my prints actually sent out. So I pay a lot of money in shipping to get prints sent out, to get other prints sent when people order them. So I do a family photography shoot. As I said the other day, I went and got some prints from the print store, went to the post office and actually had them sent out. So all that is an expense that I have on top of all the other services that I provide. I then have things like my website, which help me to run my business. I wouldn't be able to have really a business without having that website. And I've spoken about the importance of having a website before, and I think that's super important in any business. I then have business insurance, other things like my subscriptions to my editing software, my all my hardware for my computer and things like that are all expenses that I've had in my business. And then last of all, but not least, actually the largest expense that I have is all my equipment. So I have a lot of camera gear. I'm recording on one right here, right now, recording on one of my cameras. So using all that camera equipment and having to actually purchase a lot of camera equipment, I have actually purchased quite a bit of camera equipment over the past year, being my first year in business, looking to expand, wanted to buy quite a bit of equipment to actually get me out there. I didn't have a lot of equipment when I started the business, and I started, and then when I actually booked people in, I then went and bought equipment to go and actually do the shoot. So that was something that I really wanted to do, and it's an upfront cost, but I know that in the long term, it will really pay off and is going to be something that is going to really come out in the wash. So in terms of actual deductions there, we can make a lot of deductions based on things that have actually helped me in the business. As I said, all my prints that I had to have ordered, all those are direct deductions on the actual cost of selling those prints. So I can make a deduction for all that money that I spent on actually ordering the prints and then take that off however much I earned from the prints. So as I said, I didn't earn an actual profit from those. I actually ran that as a loss last year, so I can claim that as a loss on my tax return. So that becomes off my actual taxable income. So if we look at it overall, I actually lost more money last year than I made because of those expenses, because I spent $6,000 on equipment last year. So a lot of upfront costs that I knew were going to be associated. And I had the money in the bank when I was starting the business. I knew I had to have an upfront investment in my own business to actually start it up and get it off the ground. But that is gradually earning away at itself and going to actually come back to zero, hopefully by the end of the year, probably early next year. So that is an upfront cost, but I ran at a loss for last year. But as I said, I earned more money outside the business. So all of these deductions can be deducted off all of my taxable income. So I can make deductions against all of my income that I made outside the business, and therefore reducing the amount of tax I have to pay through the year, because I am a sole trader and all my money is equally proportioned across wherever I make my money. So I can claim a tax loss in my business, but because I was financially earning money outside the business, I can claim that against that to not have to pay as much tax elsewhere. So other things like advertising, I can definitely claim that. All of my shipping costs, things like that, all of my insurance, my editing software, all my office supplies, things like that, I can claim all of those things. Where it starts to get a bit tricky is any actual hardware or any assets over $300. Because if you're purchasing anything under $300, you can claim that as an immediate deduction. So you can just deduct that off your income immediately in your business. Anything over $300, you then have to depreciate that as an asset that you have in your business. So for example, I bought the computer screen last year. I use that all the time in business. That's only a business expense. I then have to make deductions on that over the lifetime of the computer screen. So every asset you buy will have a different lifespan. It's all available online if you guys want to look that up. So for instance, this computer screen has a lifespan of about 5 years. I can then depreciate the actual cost of the computer screen over 5 years. So each year I'll be taking off an amount for that computer screen over the next 5 years as it depreciates in price, depending on how much I paid for it. So I spent more than $300 on that. So that is something that I'm going to have to depreciate over the next 5 years. Other things like my camera equipment, for example, are over the $1,000 mark. So that means that I can instantly write off any of those assets. If you guys aren't aware, what that means is that I can make an immediate deduction on anything over $1,000, because in the budget last year, they included a section for any business to make an immediate deduction on any assets over $1,000, which was to give businesses more money back in their pocket as soon as possible. Rather than deducting, say, $200 a year for the next 5 years, I can deduct $1,000 straight up. So for all my camera equipment, for example, it all costs over $1,000. Each individual item costs over $1,000. So I can immediately deduct those off any income that I've made in the past 12 months. If you guys are interested in that, it's called the Instant Asset Write-Off. Make sure you have a look up what the actual terms are to that, and make sure you're not actually writing anything off too soon. Anything that comes over $1,000, so that includes anything that allows me to use that particular product. So if I buy an asset, anything that allows me to use that asset immediately is included in the price of the asset. Say, for example, if I buy a new camera, I can't use that by itself. I need to buy a lens with it. I need to buy an SD card. Say I need to buy something else to be able to actually get it up and running. So I need to get it, if I order it online, I need to get it delivered. All those are included in the expense of that asset. Anything that allows me to use it is included in that expense. Let's say, for example, you order a new camera. You order it online and you pay $999 for that camera. You then get it sent to your house and they charge you $10 in shipping costs. That would get added to the price of the assets, and the asset is now worth $1,009. it increases over the $1,000 mark, so then you can instantly write that asset off. If it was under the $1,000 mark, you would have to depreciate that asset over the actual lifespan of the asset. So say it had a lifespan of about 5 years, you would depreciate the cost of that over 5 years. If you wanted to take off $200 a year, or you wanted to use another method for depreciation, you can look those up in your own time. But that's all I'm saying. If you are interested in that, if you're working in any sort of profession like I am as a photographer, heaps of assets that I buy are over $1,000, so I'm able to write those off. That is only for this financial year. If you guys have a look back again next financial year, that may change. So really be careful into what you're getting yourself into and what you're actually buying there. All of these expenses and all of these deductions that I'm able to make allow me to reduce my income to a point where it decreases the amount of tax I have to pay. So I'm earning a specific amount of money outside the business. I add to that any income that I earned in the business, and then subtract from that any expenses or any deductions that I have within the business. So that allows me to gain an overall income that I'm then taxed at my marginal tax rate. So in Australia, if you're earning over $19,000, the next tax bracket is over $45,000, I believe. The next one over $90,000, depending on how much you get taxed, and sliding up and down through there. So allowing yourself to move down into a different tax bracket, or up into a different tax bracket, depending on how much you earn in your business. All of this stuff is very complicated stuff, and you definitely need to be able to do your own research on this. But this is just a sort of understander for me, and sort of explaining a little bit behind the things that I do in my business, and allowing me to sort of understand my own expenses. I make sure that I keep really good records of all the expenses that I have, all the income that I make. I have to have invoices for everything. I have to have receipts for everything that I bought. I can't make a deduction on anything I don't have a receipt for. So be able to actually prove that I've had that as a business expense, and prove that I actually use it 100% of the time in my business. I can't make a deduction for something 100% of something if I don't use it 100% in the business. So if I use something only half the time in business, I can only make a 50% deduction of the actual cost of that item in my business. So being able to make sure you're on top of that, and actually having the correct paperwork and all the records you need for all that stuff is very important, and making sure you get that set up from the start, which was something that I sort of had to learn on the go a little bit, because it wasn't something that I really knew much about and had to learn about as I was starting the business, which was really important to me. Of course, if this all is very complicated, and as it is, if you're trying to run a more complex business than me, if you're out there trying to run a larger business where you have more sort of employees or anything like that, or you're running a business that has more different assets involved, you can always go speak to a tax agent. I would always advise that for anyone who's not 100% confident on being able to do their own tax return. Definitely go speak to a tax agent. Also, any money that you spend on a tax agent, you're able to claim as a deduction on your tax return, so that their money is tax deductible, but still know that you will be out for that amount of money that you do spend. You'll only be able to claim back the amount of money at your marginal tax rate. So do be aware of that, but it can be a good investment in the long term if you can make more deductions. If you think by going to a tax agent you can make more deductions than you would have by yourself, maybe it is a good thing, because it may slide you down in how much tax you have to pay. I'm really interested in all this stuff, and I think it's one of the best things about being in business is being able to be on top of your own finances and really learning about all these different types of things. It's something that I really enjoy, being in business and sort of knowing about the finances and knowing a bit of the back end stuff as well. So if you guys are, that is great, and I would really advise anyone who is interested in it to be able to go and research it for themselves and look at all the different things, because it's not as scary as people make out to be, and you don't have to be scared of the tax agent. I think a lot of people are, and I would love to be able to educate a lot of people on different things. So if you do have any questions, please let me know. But I think for this week, that is where we're probably going to leave this episode. I hope you guys did gain something from this at least. And if you did, I would love to hear from you guys. I'd love to have you ask me any questions, anything you would love to know about my business, because I am an open book, and I don't ever want to be portraying to be something that I'm not. I don't want to be portraying that I'm earning more money than I am. I don't want to be portraying that I'm more successful than I am, because I think that's a way that turns a lot of people off and makes a lot of people think that they aren't able to start when they probably are, and they probably have the skills that they need to be able to start their business. And I don't want to scare anyone away. So please feel free to ask me any possible questions. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I'd love you to leave me a comment on this video. If you did enjoy actually having it on video, I'll probably be doing more videos, as I said, from now on for every episode. So they'll be up there if you guys are interested in watching them on YouTube. If you're still actually listening to the audio version, that's great as well. And if you could, as I say every week, I would love it if you guys could share this episode around. It's the one way that I've been growing this podcast, is by people sharing it with friends and family. So if you did gain anything from this podcast, I would love it if you did share this episode around. It would really mean so much to me, and it really has helped kind of continue to grow this podcast. But until next week, guys, I hope you have a great week, and I will speak to you all again next Monday. Bye.